Welcome back to my podcast, Disordinati. Today I'm so happy I'm here with Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hi, yeah, hi.
So, Tom is the deputy lead of the living collection at the Hawk Conservancy Trust, which is a magical place. The last time I've been there, I think it was winter, and we managed with my now husband see all the beautiful birds flying around, and we really felt it was one of the most beautiful experiences we've had so far in our life. So you work closely with birds of prey every day, from training them for flight demonstrations to helping conserve endangered species. I want to start from, let's say, the past, no? So let's go back a bit and bring us into your past. How did it all begin for you, and what first drew you into working with birds of prey?
Yeah, I suppose it first, well, very, very first started with, I guess, two things. One was seeing some birds of prey in the wild. So I can remember seeing buzzards and kestrels on walks in the countryside with my grandparents. We always kind of went out somewhere on a Saturday morning. My grandparents would take us somewhere, and often that was in the countryside or a local country park. And from time to time, we would see a buzzard circling or a kestrel hovering, and was always really interested in that. But didn't really kind of spark a passion, I suppose, until I was maybe 12 or 13, and I was bought like a handling experience. And we do them here at the Trust now, where you can come along and spend a few hours flying birds alongside our team. And I did that, not here at the Trust, but in my hometown in Northamptonshire. And I just absolutely fell in love with this idea that there was a wild animal who was still wild. You know, these are birds that are trained, but not kind of tame or
Yeah.
domesticated in any way. And you could let them go into the wild. They would do this beautiful flying, and they'd want to come back and land on the end of your arm. And that was just yeah, it's so magical to me. So I guess that's where it really began. And after that, when it came to Christmases or birthdays, I didn't really want anything else. I wanted to ask for, can I go back and fly the birds again and have a morning with the team and have a bird land on my arm. That was the real beginning of it, I suppose.
Oh, that's so magical, and I guess it was love at first flight. Sorry for the bad
I
joke.
like it.
So a lot of the birds you work with are also endangered. And why are they kept in places like the Conservancy, and how do they actually come into your care? That was one of the questions I had when visiting the beautiful trust.
Yeah, sure. So the birds that are here are either birds that have been hatched and raised right here at the Trust. So we've got several species that we successfully breed here for conservation breeding programs. And lots of those birds end up going to other zoological collections to go and meet partners of their own in order to hopefully kind of perpetuate this zoological breeding collection. Some of the birds have been, so we've got very few birds that came from the wild, but some of them are wild disabled birds. So they've come to us either as seized birds at places like Heathrow Airport, for example, birds that were being kind of smuggled into the illegal wildlife trade, and
Wow.
they've been kind of seized and caught. Lots of them have had injuries or ailments as a result of that kind of handling, certainly early on in life, and as a result have been kind of consigned to us. So they're non-releasable birds, but we can look after them and give them a pretty good life. And otherwise, birds have been hatched and reared at other zoological facilities around the country or around Europe, in fact. So we work very closely with partners over in mainland Europe too. So that's mostly where the birds have come from. And I guess the point of the birds being here is twofold. One is to inspire visitors who come to see us. We want people to come along and have a really nice day with us. And sort of top on my agenda, and a big part of my role now is to try to ensure that visitors have an amazing experience with us whilst maintaining really high standards of animal care. And those two things, you know, they need to work in tandem. If one doesn't work, then the other one's not going to work for very long. And so, yeah, we try to give people a really good day, to inspire people about birds of prey, to put in front of people a bird that if you were really lucky you might see in the wild, but lots of our visitors never would. And the hope is that if you inspire something in people, then you inspire people to care, because ultimately
Yeah.
People are not going to want to conserve and are not going to contribute to conservation efforts if they've never even seen the animal, never really heard much about them. You need to create some sort of bond between you and the birds. So that's one side, and then the other side is the conservation breeding side of things. So we're a member of EASA, the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and as part of that we have EEPs, so EASA ex situ breeding programs. And so lots of the species we care for here are part of those programs. They're threatened in some way in the wild, and so we're trying to maintain a safety net population within human care, either with us or through other collections as well. And we're very lucky to have a critically endangered species here we've worked with for many years, the African white-backed vulture, who a member of our team, one of my colleagues, Jane, is the coordinator for that breeding program for Europe. So she's kind of very specialist in that way. And I always like to think that Jane basically runs a dating app for vultures, I often say. So trying to pair those birds up perfectly. So yeah, lots of reasons why we would look after and keep these birds. And it's also important to mention often zoos and centres like ours are often questioned about keeping animals that are not currently threatened, endangered, critically endangered in human care. And it's really important that we do, because once a bird is endangered, critically endangered, the job of being able to sustain that population in the wild and learn enough about them in good time to try to look after and save the species,
Yeah.
it's not a sure thing for sure. And so, yeah, looking after species that are not currently threatened is as important as looking after species that are. So, yeah, breeding programs and yeah, so this research we do a lot of as well. And yeah, the visitor experience, people coming face to face with these wonderful animals.
Yeah, I mean, I am, it took my breath away. And as you said, a lot of people, including me, had never seen a bird like that, so close. And I
Yes.
felt like I was in a magical kingdom or something. And then I forgot that life can be so beautiful, and, you get to experience these encounters, and you guys make it possible. Thinking about something that interests me even more is your personal growth in relationship to this job that you do. What have birds taught you about yourself over time, and has working with them changed the way, for instance, you see patience, trust, or even control? Because as you said, they fly, they come back, and I just wonder how this has impacted you as a person.
Yeah, that's a really lovely question, and I've never been asked that before. I think in the first stages of learning to work with birds and probably animals in general, and especially if you're training animals, is it teaches you an enormous amount of patience and an enormous amount of observation skills, because you're working with another species who's not able to communicate with you in the same way that you can communicate with another human. And so you need to pick up on the little messages and signals that they're sending you. And some of those messages are very, very loud, and some of them are very, very quiet, and both are important. So I think, yeah, definitely observation skills. And I'm sure you and your audience will have heard of that kind of learning arc, that initially you learn quite a lot in a short space of time, and your confidence in your ability to do everything goes up really, really high, and you realize actually suddenly something happens and it makes you realize you don't actually know as much as you thought you did. And I see lots of people coming in and going in the kind of zoological field or in the work with birds of prey, who've been doing it a year or two, and yeah, they're kind of at the top of that hill. They've learned quite a bit, but not got huge amounts of experience and think they know everything. And I was definitely there as well. A couple of years in, and think, well, this is easy. You offer a bird a bit of food, they fly to your glove, and that's it. Off you go. And it's so much deeper than that. You're forging relationships with animals that are really key to their welfare and to their longevity. And so, yeah, noticing those small things. Birds of prey, like so many predators, so many animals, are really good at hiding their illnesses as well. So not only in the training side of things, you're picking something up so that you can teach the bird the next thing and kind of enrich their lives that way, but also to make sure that they are fit and healthy. You need to know the difference between a bird standing on one leg because it's really content, because birds often do that. They'll switch from one leg to the other to rest one foot, rest the other foot. Or a bird standing on one leg because the other foot has an infection, or the other foot, they've got some sort of swelling, or they've injured themselves in some way. And those nuances can be really, really subtle. But when you know the birds, you're spending time with them every single day, you pick up on those things. So yeah, observation is one, and I think maybe more compassion as well. I mean, I think anybody who comes into working with animals one to one already is or should be equipped with an enormous amount of compassion. Trying to have understanding for others and have understanding for the animals that they work with. But yeah, just trying to kind of tread carefully and not getting frustrated when things don't go the way you'd like them to, because these are birds with their own minds, and they're the old saying of being bird brained is definitely not true. They're smart animals, and so they're making their own decisions all the time, and quite rightly. And so we should be there to sort of to listen and have empathy with them. Yeah, I mean, we're so lucky that we work with animals that we can let go, and they follow out all of those natural behaviors. There's how many, I don't know how many tiger keepers can open the
Yes.
doors of the enclosure and say, right, you're going to have a run around the field for a couple of hours, and I'll call you in later. You can't do it safely, and so we're in such a privileged position with birds that they can work with us, and we can do that in a really safe way, and give them that level of enrichment. And I guess the biggest thing is one, kind of bit like what I was saying before. When you think you know everything, there will be a bird that comes along and reminds you that you don't. They think in a different way. They want to do things in a different way, and that's actually what keeps our job really fun. And you have to be really agile with that and adapt to them.
I mean, that must be so fascinating. And as you say, the power of noticing is such a skill and such an enrichment for everyday life as well. And they do
Yeah.
say that if you're not able to love an animal, you're not even able to love a human. So, I think
Yeah,
it's,
and it's so
yeah.
hard for animal keepers, and we find this here ourselves. I've worked with, I don't know, it must be maybe close to 400 birds now in my time, and some very, very closely, and some kind of only at arm's reach because that's somebody else's duty to look after that animal. But and right at the beginning of my journey working with birds, when you have a death in your
Yeah.
group of animals that you look after, it's a devastating
Mm.
experience because you've poured your heart and soul and love into working with this individual animal, and I feel like that grief stays with you, and it maybe it does become a little easier to deal with the more you see, because you understand that, if you work with living things, then at some point those living things will die, and often these animals don't have quite so long a life expectancy of humans, so it's almost guaranteed when you start that process. But yeah, I've found that interesting that you still have those feelings, but also the understanding that you can't just stop and sort of sit in that grief, because
Yeah.
here at the trust we've got 130 birds. If somebody passes away, there's 129 others who still need you today, so you have to carry on. So that, I think,
Absolutely.
it's a side of sort of animal care. It always looks very glamorous being a zookeeper or a bird keeper, and in our displays for sure it looks like the most glamorous thing in the world, and it is sometimes. But there's the hard side of things as well, that sometimes you have to let those relationships go, and that's, I guess, that's a life lesson too.
Yeah. And I was thinking about owls because they're my personal spirit animal, and I always think that they're such a comfort because they kind of look after you. I don't know, I have this image of owls protecting us all during the night, and so the idea of them dying, in a way, it's comforting to know that they might be somewhere else in spirit,
Sure.
and so it's quite beautiful, this spiritual connection as well. Uh, Thinking about the shows, because I was really shocked by the fact that you could let, a bird fly and then they would come back. How does that work? What's really going on behind the scenes in that training process?
Yeah, so it's kind of working with animals on a one-to-one basis. So you're right, when we get to the kind of pinnacle of the training, we can free fly the birds, and they can come back. The key thing in all of the training we're trying to do is having as much element of choice in their training as possible. So if
Mm.
a bird of prey feels coerced or threatened or cornered in some way, of course, when they're then allowed to free fly, the first thing they're going to do is fly away because they feel under threat, and they have that capability to do that. So again, it's a, kind of about that treading carefully and monitoring what's going on day to day with the birds. But ultimately, we're working on positive reinforcement. So we want to encourage the birds to come and spend time with us. And so, really, the way to a bird of prey's heart is through food. That's kind of their main driver in life. They're predators, and so you offer a tasty chunk of beef or quail or chicken. They are kind of all yours, really. But it's kind of important that you follow the process of the learning as well, so that the bird's making the choice to come closer to you or to step inside a travel crate or to step on a set of scales. And the more choice and flexibility you give them, the better foundation you've got for training. And so you, in the initial stages of training, you're trying to catch them being good, really. You might put, let's take scales training, for example. We weigh all the birds every day to kind of monitor their health, and they come over, a fully trained bird here, you put the scales down, they're straight over onto the scales because they know, stand on the scales, sit really still, they get a little tidbit, not a lot of food, but enough to go, well done. And so that sits well. Initially, the scales are kind of there, and often you're spending a lot of time, not a lot is happening until the bird works out, oh, I come a little bit closer to the scales, little tidbit of food, and a bit closer the next day, a bit closer the next day. And so it's those tiny little increments that you're working on throughout any training, really. What are your approximations? What did the bird do last time? What is different this time, and can we make progress? And some birds, we write a training plan out for each of the birds. Some birds will go from step 1 to step 10 in a single session. They're just way ahead of you. And sometimes we're not ready for that. And then the bird's frustrated with us. It's like, come on, I want to learn something new.
Come
And
on.
other times we're stuck at step 3 for many, many days at a time. And that can be frustrating for both parties because you're trying to work out, how can I communicate openly with this animal? And sometimes, you need to do a little bit of very clear communication. Take the scales thing. I'm actually just going to put a really tasty piece of food on the scales, and then scales, good. Come over here. Look, there's a piece of food here. But eventually, you kind of don't want to be sort of luring the bird to that spot. I'm only coming because I can see food.
Of
You want
course.
them to make the choice of, oh yeah, scales, sit there, wait, little piece of food. And the same for flying. Lots of our birds, and you will have seen this in our displays, as they come out of the aviary and they're flying around in the sky, they're not immediately being rewarded, but they know that it's coming. So that I keep doing this thing that I've been rewarded for, and then I get a reward. And we've got a great bird here called Bo, and she's an Egyptian vulture. And Egyptian vultures are great migratory species, and they spend lots of time on the wing in the wild. And so she's our highest flying bird here at the Trust. She'll go up a couple of thousand feet up in the sky on a nice warm day.
Okay.
And the real challenge is that's what we want to encourage. But the real challenge is, how can you teach that bird to do that? Because when she's 2,000 feet in the sky above you, you can't hand her a reward to go, yes, that. But you're working with smart creatures, right? So she's smart enough to know that if every time she starts to make height, you immediately call her back down for a reward, she'll make the connection. I fly up, a reward is going to be presented. She's smart enough to know that that's the bit she's been rewarded for, not necessarily just the coming back and coming and landing on your glove. So yeah, there's kind of layers to it. The base is, can I let you go and you come back to your aviary, or you come back to my glove? But there are lots of other behaviours that we want to see from birds, and that's when you kind of need really, really good, really active thinking trainers to work with the animals. And again, compassionate trainers who know on a day that it's too hot, or it's too wet, or it's too windy, or the bird next door has got a chick at the moment, and that might impact the bird's mentality. So there's all of these parameters that might change things, but ultimately, positive, very often food-based reward is the best way to go. Yeah, that coercion or fear or anything like that has kind of been taught to us, certainly throughout our childhood. You kind of get this image of kind of the lion tamer in the circus ring cracking the whip. That works really well for so long, and then they realise, actually, I can eat you if I want to.
Yeah,
It's not a
exactly.
long-term positive relationship. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was really impressed by also how we came to a night show, which for me was, even more magical. And what also surprised me was the close connection that each bird has with one specific trainer. They seem to really, know the trainer and prefer even one of the trainers over others. So that for me was really interesting to see.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, we try, that's the ultimate really for us working on the team operationally is that every bird works with every trainer because that's, and we work towards that as a goal. But again, watching the bird signals and watching how they're responding to us, sometimes it becomes really clear that person is a no, is a no. That bird is saying no to you, and it's not necessarily a no forever. And sometimes we end up kind of just taking stock of it and thinking, well, we could really work hard on Tom getting to work with that particular eagle, and the eagle would come round, and I could go by and walk past the aviary, drop a piece of food in, and walk away. And very soon the eagle goes, oh, every time Tom walks by, doesn't linger too long, but he always brings nice things, and we can start a positive relationship. But sometimes the time that might take, it's sort of not worth it because if there's 10 other members of the team who can fly that bird, I'm not sure it adds many more strings to our bow or the bird's bow to be able to work with me. And my time's maybe better spent training a different bird and working with a bird who's really connecting with me. So yeah, you're right. The birds have preferences, and we tend to listen to those preferences if it's at all possible as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over your career, what's been one of your most unforgettable experiences? Maybe a moment that was especially joyful or surprising or even difficult?
One of the standout experiences has been I got to go and assist on some conservation work with African whiteback vultures about 4 or 5 years ago now, and to be able to see birds that you've seen, very close up and face to face within a centre like ours, but in the wild, and especially assisting with checking nests for some of these birds. I mean, that is amazing. Being in Africa, looking at the habitat you've spent your life talking about to people and educating about, and actually being there is just phenomenal. And I think every time you get the opportunity to see something like that, it kind of brings home the conservation messages that we're given to people as well. We're able to better talk about it because it really does come from the heart. And the trust has worked really hard on enabling members of the bird team who work with the birds and who talk about those messages to go out and spend time on some of the conservation projects, either here in the UK or in Africa. So yeah, that's certainly stand out. I mean, I've been so lucky. I've worked with so many different species that many animal keepers and bird trainers would be, so overjoyed to work with. We're working with a young secretary bird at the moment who's just about a year old, but he came here about 6 months old.
Yeah.
And there aren't very many of those around in zoological collections, and that's part of the reason he's here. Hopefully, one day we can breed them here.
Yeah.
So that's been really exciting. I've got too many to mention really, but yeah, definitely being on top of an acacia tree in a vulture nest with a baby vulture. We've ringed the bird and taken samples and measurements, and then we bring the bird back up into the nest, and you leave them, and you hope that this is going to be a bird that manages to survive all the threats that the species is facing. Was a really special moment. I can picture that in my mind very clearly.
Yeah, that must be unique as a life experience.
Yeah.
We've briefly talked about it, but there's something really powerful about seeing a bird fly. From your perspective, what does that sense of freedom actually feel like when you're working so closely with them?
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to offer that and to give them that, and that's why our training is so important because without that, there's no real guarantee of the birds coming back. And as I say, some of these birds are endangered, critically endangered, and so they kind of present a huge value to their species being here. So we do take, I guess, a small risk in offering that freedom to the birds, but yeah, I mean, it's wonderful, and sometimes you have to pinch yourself and just to believe the fact that this is your job and you get to do it every day to see these birds flying, and they're all a little bit different as well. So Bo, the Egyptian vulture I mentioned, who wants to go up and soar and glide around at thousands of feet, sometimes there are minutes at a time where she's totally out of view. She's so high in the sky that in human eyes she's disappeared.
Yeah.
We fly almost all of the birds we fly with either a radio transmitter or a GPS tracking unit on. So she wears one of these GPS units. In fact, she wears both. just because she's a bird most likely to range, so she gets lost. We
Yeah.
want most chances to be able to find her, which she did earlier on this year,
Oh my.
and she ended up having a couple of nights out actually about
Oh no.
20 miles from us here. So we were
Yeah.
all pulling our hair out, worried about her, but she was fine, and she came back fine a couple of days later. But yeah, she wants to go up and soar, glide thousands of feet up, and you can't even see her, and yet that connection is still there somehow. She's still watching you. She's still waiting for that cue to come in. And then some birds, we've right on the opposite end of the scale. I'm going to name a bird, Galaxy, who's our
Yeah.
spectacled owl.
I remember it.
You remember him?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's such an amazing character. But flying is definitely not the top of his list when it comes to his daily agenda. He'd be very, very happy to come out in the flying arena, sit on the post, and have everybody just be besotted with him because he's so handsome and he's got so much character and he has a lovely little hoot and glowing yellow eyes. But for both of those species, the reason behind why they act like that, and it helps us to tell their story because the charisma that spectacled owl has for the visitor creates an instant connection. But the reason is because in the wild, spectacled owls spend the vast majority of their day sat in a tree, not flying. It is not natural for a spectacled owl to go off soaring around in the sky like an Egyptian vulture. It's just not. So again, going back to the bird's natural history and trying to work out what's going to be comfortable for them is also part of the joy of seeing them fly. Seeing them do what they would do naturally and what they want to do is probably the most fulfilling part of our job. Is just enabling that natural behavior, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And one last question, for people who aren't professionals but love wildlife, what's your advice? How can we better support birds of prey or even just help the birds we see in our own gardens?
I think one of the number one things you can do if you're not directly involved with animals is to support organisations that are directly involved with animals. And of course, if you're a bird lover, I would always recommend a visit to us here because you're probably not going to get a better experience seeing birds of prey up close doing what they would do in the wild than you're going to get by coming here. And of course, the whole point of us having a visitor centre is yes, educating people, but the money that people pay to come in goes towards supporting these birds in the wild and our breeding programs and research programs we have here. So that's usually number one on my list. In terms of like birds in the garden, I've spent lots of time with some amazing naturalists and our conservation research team here. One thing you can do is kind of like manage your spaces less. If you're lucky enough to have a green space, a garden, or even just a balcony with plants and things, growing wildflowers, having areas of water where birds can bathe and drink and other species can thrive is a really good start. We're lucky. Certainly here in the UK, to have for lots of people to have really nice gardens, and they create such a huge, almost like private national park, I suppose. If all of those gardens were
Yeah.
all just donating 10% of their garden and they're just going to leave it for wildlife, have a log pile, have a water bath or a small pond or something, I think it could make a huge difference. So yeah, donations and visiting the right places, learning what's needed, and learning about these species, because we know that when we know more about a species, we naturally just care about them because how can you not? If you learn about an African white-backed vulture and how good they are at raising their youngsters, or how a secretary bird survives some of the most venomous snakes by kicking them as hard as they can, 5 times their own body weight in force. You're like, these are charismatic, interesting, beautiful, important animals, and yeah, visiting somewhere like this it just kind of brings that out, and it really helps the species.
Yeah. Tom, thank you so much for being here with me on this podcast. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been lovely to chat. Thank you.